Malarkis 5 minutes for questions, please. To another industry, other IoT products, default passwords are a big problem. The fact that we're even relying on passwords at all is a big problem.
Okay, thank you. My time has expired and I yield back.
And we yield back, Chair. Thanks, gentlemen. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Malarkis, 5 minutes for questions, please.
Internet of Things devices present, including potential attacks on other systems. Dr. Fu, it appears that one of the reoccurring problems identified in your testimony is the use of insecure operating systems, which are actually easier to infect and target for distributed denial of service attacks. Have you seen industry react to these issues and move forward more stable operating systems? And are there impediments to making such a switch?
I have seen industry move to better operating systems, but like most communities, there's a wide distribution. There's a leader, there's maybe not the leader. I still see Windows XP, which is a decades-old operating system in critical systems. There's a photograph of one Windows XP system in a water treatment facility in Michigan in my testimony, controlling water pumps for the city. Windows XP is susceptible to the last decade of already released malware. It doesn't take anyone more than a kid in their basement to be able to cause a problem. It hasn't happened because no one's wanted it to happen. It's all about the economics. Certainly on the high-end devices like linear accelerators, for example, or radiation therapy devices, you're talking multi-million-dollar machines. Certainly when a hospital buys a new device, they're more likely to get a new operating system because it just comes with a new system. However, most hospitals have capital equipment costs, and they don't want to have to buy a new MRI or whatnot every 10 years. You know, it should last 20 or 30. This is why you'll still see Windows 95 machines, you'll see Windows 98 machines, the year's important, in hospitals, because when they go to the manufacturer saying, hey, we really want to have an operating system that we can keep secure, they'll say, oh, sure, just why don't you buy a whole new machine? And so there was this unwritten assumption that the software would be maintained. It may not have been written into the agreement, but the healthcare community felt that it should have been kept secure, kept maintained, but from the manufacturing standpoint, it was, we've provided you this device.
Thank you. Reports show that many devices used in the October attack were situated overseas. While some seek to regulate devices in our own country, how do we protect ourselves from devices that are outside the U.S.? Oh, Dr. Fu, and then if someone wants to chime in, that's okay too.
Let me just comment briefly, and I'll let my fellow witnesses opine. I think the important thing about computer security is not to be able to put yourselves in a secure environment, but you need to be able to tolerate an insecure environment. We're never going to be able to make networks, blissful places full of rainbows. The networks are always going to be hostile, so we need to make sure that whatever we put on there is going to be able to tolerate malicious traffic. DDoS attacks, however, are extremely hard to defend against because they cut at the core of where we are least prepared, and that is high availability.
Anyone else want to comment on that?
So it's two things. I think that U.S. regulation, especially if it's U.S. and Europe and some more major markets, can cause a new environment which raises the tide for everybody, because companies are not going to make two devices. They're going to make one device and sell it. So we can make a difference with us in like-minded countries, like we can in so many other industries. But Dr. Fu is correct that we can't assume ever a benign environment, that it's going to be a combination of making the devices that we can touch more secure, which means the insecure devices are more a minority, and then building infrastructure controls to secure against this malicious minority, and it'll always be that.
Thank you. Sir, do you want to comment quickly? Because I have one more question.
I was just going to say that we have a fundamental belief of ensuring that we can try to route packets on the backbone that are based on reputation. So the more that businesses and backbones can collaborate together on data and route traffic based on reputation, I think the better prepared we're going to be.
Thank you. One of the biggest concerns for Dr. Fu, one of the biggest concerns of future distributed denial of service attacks is the potential impact on hospitals and their patients. We already know that hospitals are targets in other areas such as ransomware hacks. Question for Dr. Fu, how can hospitals best protect themselves from these threats in their current technology, and should industry prioritize the healthcare sector in preventing current cyber threats?
Right. Well, in the short term, hospitals are in a sticky place. There's not a whole lot of mitigating solutions. So the best medicine I can recommend for hospitals right now is to really know their inventory of medical devices. I saw some discussion yesterday in a DHS report about a bill of materials of software. Hospitals don't even know what software is running on the inside of their facility because the manufacturers don't know themselves what are on those medical devices. If we only knew what was on the medical devices, we could better understand what risks we are taking.
Thank you very much. You're back, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Chair, thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Brooks, 5 minutes for your question.
Thank you. I'm going to follow up, Dr. Fu, and if you would explain a bit more about what so your concern is that the devices that are being used actually in the hospitals are not aware of what is on those devices, and so what kind of mechanism should we have so that hospital systems are fully aware of what's in their hospital?
Right. So let me just frame the context. So hospitals want to make sure that they have a continuity of operations of their clinical workflow, so they don't have to shut down like the MedStar system shut down in this area for several days. And so the problem is when you don't know what your assets are, how are you going to protect that? If you don't know what ports are open, the manufacturers, they're not, I would say, willfully causing harm as far as I know, but they're simply not providing enough information so that the hospital staff can do their jobs to assure the continuity of their clinical facilities. So providing a bill of materials of what software comes on a device when it enters a hospital, it won't completely solve the problem, but it's going to really help, because you can't do step 2 until you do step 1. You have to know your assets, you have to know your inventory before you can effectively control security mitigation controls.
And so while that has obviously life-saving or life-ending implications, what other sectors are you most concerned about, and this is for the panel, that, you know, the sector integration, so to speak, of devices within maybe the system is not known?
I'll just say public utilities, water, gas, electric. It surprises me how people just sort of laugh about, oh, we don't have security, ha ha ha. And, you know, we're not going to be laughing when the lights go out.
So I think looking at it in sectors is almost self-defeating, because what we're worried about is interactions. And, you know, if you ask somebody a month and a half ago whether a vulnerability in a web camera can affect Twitter, you know, some people would say no. And in a lot of ways, we barely know how the internet works. I mean, Mr. Drew's answer of whether this particular defense would mitigate this particular attack, and the answer was, we're not really sure. And it's the emergent properties of interconnecting everything that causes the vulnerabilities. If we focus on a sector, we risk missing the big picture. And they are all computers, whether they have wheels or propellers or in your body, and they affect each other, or they're on the same internet. So I urge you to think holistically. And not, I mean, there are sectors that are more vulnerable, more critical. That's obvious. But the cause of the vulnerability could come from nowhere.
Mr. Drew, a question whether or not, what your thoughts are as to whether or not hacking back or some other form of active defense should be permissible. Thoughts on that?
I know that this has been a fairly large debate within my industry. It's been a fairly large debate within the U.S. We have these conversations on a regular basis about green viruses, where if we know that particular exposure exists and we know that we can write software to go out and patch the system on the user's behalf to get the malware off the system, then we would be better protecting both the consumer as well as the internet as a whole. And I think that is a fairly dark road to go down. I think that it's an excuse for us not fixing the ecosystem and providing the right incentives in the right locations, and potentially has impacts that you know, the author writing that software isn't necessarily aware of, as he's touching a pretty broad set of devices out on the ecosystem. So I'd say I fear more of the consequences of that than I do pushing the right incentives in the right layers.
And going back to the question about whether or not we have the appropriate safeguards in place, we have 209,000 job openings right now, according to Dr. Fu. And what are the programs, degree programs or other types of certification programs that should be offered that we are not offering enough in our higher ed institutions or training programs? And you know, are degrees necessary, or do we need to have different types of certifications short of degrees?
I think we need all of the above, especially it's a little-known discipline called embedded cybersecurity, but this is very related to IoT, bridging the hardware and the software. I think we need both at the community college level. I think we need both at the four-year college, both in the graduate studies, also especially in advanced master's programs for already skilled workers who are perhaps experts at building cars or designing cars, but need to know how do you build security into that thinking. There aren't enough opportunities for those workers to come back to get that training. And a final comment is the pipeline. I think in the engineering and some of the sciences we have difficulty, I think, attracting, tapping new resources, different demographics. I think we need to be much more, doing much more outreach to high schools and some of the kids who are coming up to encourage them to go into these fields, and especially women and minorities.
Thank you all for your work. I yield back.
Thanks, the gentlelady. Gentlelady yields back, and the chair